Hello everybody and welcome back to RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on this week's episode I've got a new build for you, and this is part 1. This should be considered your leveling guide. It'll get you up through Elite and give you the mainstay of the build, how it feels, how it works, all things in between. And then we'll be back next week with how it works in Ultimate and all the changes that we've got to make on top of that. But in the meantime, I'll tell you all about the devotions, skills that we're going to be using, and even some gear that makes leveling a lot easier. So, that being said, sit back, relax, strap in for this Witch Hunter build guide. Now, our Witch Hunter is going to be based around a few abilities, and the most important of those two, at least early on, is going to be Blade Burst and the modifier for Blade Burst, which is Lethal Assault. If we can get enough points into this ability, it will absolutely nuke entire packs of enemies from existence, and it pairs very, very well with some of the devotions that we get later on in the tree, namely Abomination and the Foul Eruption devotion ability. We're also picking up Ring of Steel as well as the modifier Ring of Frost. Those are going to be pretty useful for damage and AoE clear as well, but definitely take a backseat to Blade Burst. We have got Shadow Strike, and this is going to be one of those abilities that comes in a little bit weird because we don't have a lot of points in Shadow Strike itself, but we are going to max out Justifiable Ends, Nadala's Justifiable Ends, which is the secondary ability on that skill. And then we're also going to max out Nightfall, because both of those modifiers are incredibly strong for Shadow Strike for what we're trying to do. Now, with that out of the way, I'll also mention that the Witch Hunter is a cross between a Nightblade and an Occultist, so if you didn't know that, you're welcome, and you should see some relatively tame Occultist abilities on the hotbar as well. Namely, we've got Blood of Dreeg, Bloody Pox, and at least for the time being, Curse of Frailty. So, we're taking mostly defensive options on the Occultist side of things, at least for our activatable abilities, but we'll talk more about that. But now that we've got the quick lowdown on the abilities, I'll give you the same on the devotions. So, like I mentioned, we're going to use Abomination. That is going to be dropping a lot of poison and acid damage for us in that skill, as well as all down the left side of Abomination. We've got Behemoth as well for some defensive stats. Got Murmur's Kiss, but we're not going to complete it entirely. We've also got Ugal the Insatiable Knight, which you can see with all the black blood puddles hovering around us on the ground. And then everything in between. There's Spider, Eye of the Guardian, Acheron Scorpion, Hawk, Eel, and Vulture. This devotion path is a little bit all over the place, but ultimately it's going to do a lot for us in a bunch of different avenues and make our build nice and shiny in all the right light. And then lastly, in terms of some easy gear that you can try to farm up for this build that are really, really effective, we have number 1, a monster infrequent. It's the Putrid Necklace of blank. It's a monster infrequent. You're going to find it around, I think this is Act 1 actually. I think this is a Slith necklace. So you may find it more often. Yeah, you'll definitely find it in Act 1 or in that side mission from Act 1 when you go take on a bunch of Slith. There is next up the just Basilisk Mark. That is a medal that you'll get in Act 5, and it upgrades both your Ring of Steel and your Blood of Dreeg. Really fantastic stuff there because it's adding acid damage to Ring of Steel and converting 100% of the piercing damage to acid damage as well. So, now that I look at it, we can take out the Ring of Frost. If you want to focus more on an acid or poison specific type of build, you can funnel the damage for Ring of Steel more into that. Or if you don't want to use this item, always stick with Ring of Frost to get the cold damage back. Get it all going from Ring of Frost there. Lots of options with this build inside of your damage types, but ultimately we're going to be using cold and acid poison for all of the heavy lifting. You have also got the Venomancer's Raymond. That is a chest piece that you can get that will add a whole bunch of points to Blade Burst, and I'm not sure if it's just for the mythical version, but it also gives you points to Aspect of the Guardian, which is the upgrade for Blood of Dreeg, which adds physical resistance and some other good effects. So really heavy, good stuff there. Ultimately, once we make it late in the game, up to 94, we're going to go for the... what is it? The Venom Blade Pact. That is a set for the Nightblade, and it's going to involve 2 one-handed weapons, a hat, and a jacket. So that should really up our game when it comes to Ultimate, but at least for now, just keep that in the back of your mind. And then certainly when it comes to weapons, there are a couple early game items that take the spots that you need. There's a Venom Lash, super useful. It comes with some Merciless Repertoire points. And there is also Scion of Noxious Wounds. That one comes with some upgrades to Execution, if you're going to go that route, as well as Aspect of the Guardian, Merciless Repertoire. Again, that may only be the mythical version. Not 100%. Not 100% just yet. That's also very good if you're using an Oathkeeper, going down the path of acid and poison, the Scion of Noxious Wounds. But the last one I can recommend as far as items go, early on in the game at least, is going to be Widow's Sting. That is a ring that is blue in variety, but fairly easy to find, and it's going to give you points into Blade Burst, as well as attack speed and elemental resistance, which is always pretty handy. Now, you got the quick and dirty, that's all out of the way. If you want to leave, I'll understand, but I do want to mention a couple more things about this build and how it works, at least up until we get to Ultimate, because things will likely change once we get there, as we'll be doing less damage and we'll have to be doing much more survival work than in either normal or elite. So if you're still watching, you've been warned. We're about to get into the nitty-gritty of the build. Now, when it comes to the Nightblade, and specifically Amarasta's Blade Burst, as well as Lethal Assault, there's a couple things you might want to be aware of. Amarasta's Blade Burst, number 1, does cold and frostburn damage with a chance to freeze the target, and it is on a relatively low cooldown. It's almost, well, it's just under 2 seconds. The area for it is rather small, but that is going to get much bigger with the right gear later in the game. After that, though, you'll take Lethal Assault, and Lethal Assault is actually a damage modifier when you use Blade Burst. So basically, you'll swing Blade Burst, get the Lethal Assault for 4 seconds, and that's going to be giving you flat acid and cold damage, as well as buffing those damage types too. So everything that Lethal Assault does is just there to buff the damage that you're already doing. Considering that we're both cold, acid, and poison, everything should be, you know, all sunshine and rainbows as long as we have that. We just want as much damage as possible, and it is completely worth it. Now, you can also pick up the Dual Blades talent. That skill is going to allow you to take 2 one-handed weapons, such as the Nightblade's Right, but more importantly, this skill is going to give you a physical resistance, which is going to come in very handy once you get into Ultimate. So, realistically, I am trying to get this up to just about 10% physical resistance, and we're going to let some of the late game gear do the rest of the heavy lifting. But once you hit that 10% physical res on Dual Blades, you're good to drop it. As far as Elite is considered, you can also pick up Hidden Hand, Nidala's Hidden Hand, and Amarasta's Quick Cut. I'm using both in this video, and both are very easy to use when standing still and fighting enemies who don't have a whole lot of easy damage to kill you with. Now, once we get to the next video and Ultimate, I'm going to take those out of rotation completely because I want their points in different damage, but as far as the early game is considered, you're getting crit damage from them, You're getting also acid and poison damage with a chance to slow. So it's good when it works, but if you don't want to take it, you're not going to be missing out on a whole lot. It's really just there to stand still and fight to the death with those bigger enemies, and all things considered, if you don't like to play that way, you don't have to worry about it. Also, because of that stand still and fight to the death type of mechanic, you'll also want to pick up Blade Barrier. 1 point is all you need. It's just a panic button. It's just there to save you from certain death. And not only is that going to help you in Ultimate, it will help you literally all the time, always. So pick it up, sign it to your hotbar, make sure that you use it when you're in danger, and that is the extended Blade Barrier. It's just like Arioctes. It's all good. Never not take it. Whew, so after that, we're talking about Shadow Strike. Shadow Strike is one of the premier Nightblade abilities, but we've only got a point in it. Considering that we have, along with our gear, 18 points into Nidala's Justifiable Ends, you can see the disparity. There are also a whole bunch of points in Nightfall, but Justifiable Ends is going to reduce the cooldown of Shadow Strike, making you much more mobile. It is going to add a lot of crit damage to the ability as well, and put on poison damage just like the Grimdawn gods intended. Lastly, there is Nightfall. Nightfall is going to add some flat cold damage as well as weapon damage to Shadow Strike, but it also has a percentage of attack converted to health, so you can get some health back when you're using Shadow Strike, and there is a 50% chance to put the target to sleep for 3 to 5 seconds. It's actually really cool because it hits in an AoE and it's doing the types of damage that we need, so I highly recommend. We may actually venture into, putting more damage into Shadow Strike itself, but at least for the time being, all I really want in normal and normal and elite is Justifiable Ends and Nightfall. After that, there is Pneumatic Burst. We've only got 1 point in there just for the healing and the ability to take Shadow Dance. Shadow Dance is going to give us a chance to dodge melee attacks or projectiles and reduce entrapment duration. And one thing that we're going to be aiming for in Ultimate is having modifiers for both Pneumatic Burst and Blood of Dreeg that allow them to last for more than, or it's actually allow them to last for 2 minutes. So I want both of these abilities to last for 2 minutes at a time, so I can constantly have up the effects of Shadow Dance and Aspect of the Guardian. It's really good, basically turns it into a passive that you just have to occasionally refresh every 2 minutes. Passively, we also have the Breath of Belgothian. This is a 1 point modifier that you'll take for Pneumatic Burst that'll reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds. Once we hit Ultimate and find the monster infrequent that allows us to keep this up, indefinitely, they won't much need this modifier, but for the early on, reducing the cooldown is important so you can have it up as often as possible. Passive auras that we're talking about, Veil of Shadow, but we've only got a single point into Veil of Shadow in order to take Night's Chill. Night's Chill is reducing cold resistance and poison acid resistance by 25% within our melee range, which makes us even more deadly up close. I don't think I have to explain why this is good, other than to say, heck yeah, brother. Phantasmal Armor is one of the defensive options in this kit. It's going to give you energy absorbed from enemy spells, which is super handy because you will be flinging lots of abilities when it comes to this build. You're also getting 25 pierce resistance at level 10 out of 12, and reducing freeze, petrify, and getting some energy leech retaliation too. So super strong ability for getting energy and getting some of that hard to get pierce resistance that isn't available readily in our devotions or some of the early game gear. Really fantastic. Merciless Repertoire is next. This is pure damage though, so we're doing poison damage on the flat end. We're getting cold, acid, frostburn, poison buffs, and we're also getting 146% at level 15 out of 12 to all of our retaliation damage. So when we get hit, we can hit it back a little bit, but yeah, mostly we're about the buffing of the other damage types. It's really, really handy stuff there. Moving on to the Occultist tree. Our main activatable abilities here, we have number 1, Bloody Pox. This is going to come in handy a lot later on because I believe Venom Blade is going to be adjusting this to be a bigger damage portion of our kit. But at least for now, we've got a few points into Bloody Pox itself, which has a percentage reduction to enemies' health. And then more than that, we've got a couple points into Black Death, which is going to add some straight poison damage per second, increase the duration, and has a chance to confuse targets hit as well. Super, super good stuff, which pairs really nicely with some of our devotions. I'll explain in just a second. Before we get to those devotions, though, let's get a crack at the possession ability of the Occultist. This is going to give you some damage absorption. Chaos damage isn't really important, but chaos resistance and skill disruption protection are very, very good. I would consider possession your number 1 exclusive skill when it comes to this build, considering that it's the only one that you can take, but it also does a lot of what you want. It's also buffing acid and poison damage, which isn't hurting anything in the build. Blood of Dreeg, we also have a single point here just to get it going, and that gives us access to the 16% health restored. But more than that, we get access to Aspect of the Guardian, which is increasing acid and poison damage and giving us 14% physical resistance at 13 points out of 12. Couple that with 105% poison and acid resistance, and you can imagine how little we actually need going on in terms of components when it comes to this build. So basically we hit the heal button. If our monster infrequent is equipped, we get 2 minutes of 105% poison and acid resistance at 13. Pretty nuts to the butts, if we're being honest. Now, since we've got our abilities out of the way and we kind of explained how they work, let's gear over towards devotion and how those work together in tandem with your abilities. This build is going to have quite a few devotions that will also be doing something at least passively when it comes to dealing damage with your build. So we have got, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 4 that are going to activate off of buttons that we press, and we've got 2 that are just activating passively based on skills attached to them. So the first one that you'll recognize is probably Black Blood of Ugal. This has a 30% chance to activate when we get hit, and it's going to summon the blood. You can have up to 6 of these. They live for 6 seconds. They do not die, and they're going to deal both cold and acid damage while reducing the target's damage for 1 second, turning off their health regen and slowing them down as well. Considering the sheer number of these little buggers that can be out there, they are fantastic, and I really just like the way they look, if nothing else. But since they do the right type of damage, I'm definitely going to pick them up. Tainted Eruption, coming from the Abomination, is attached to our Blade Burst. And what this means is that basically, anytime that we hit a Blade Burst on a large clump of enemies, it is going to trigger the Tainted Eruption, meaning that you'll see a big acid explosion, just like that, around our Blade Burst too. So it's got a 15% chance to activate with this ability, but given that we hit in an AoE, chances are it's going to go off. Next up is the Giant's Blood. Giant's Blood activates on a 15% chance when we get hit. It's going to give us 20% health back, as well as 1200 flat health restored, give us a whole bunch of health regen, and it lasts for 10 seconds. It's really good for kind of squishier melee focused builds who need to survive through a lot. Murmur's Kiss is next. Actually, the skill is called Rumor. It's got a 15% chance to activate on attack, and I've got it equipped to Ring of Steel at the moment, but in the early playthroughs, you're going to want to equip it to Curse of Frailty instead, since it's also an AoE, and this will reduce cold resistance, poison acid resistance, defensive ability, and also deal cold and acid damage. You want to make sure it activates in an AoE, because that's where you're going to get the most effectiveness out of it, but Curse of Frailty will get you through while you're waiting to change over to Ring of Steel. There is also Bloody Pox on Guardian's Gaze. It kind of works the same way that Curse of Frailty does, in that Bloody Pox can hit multiple people on a relatively short cooldown, and that is going to trigger the Guardian's Gaze eyeballs very often. So, you'll hit Bloody Pox on groups of enemies, you'll be full of eyeballs, at which point you can Shadow Strike in, if you haven't already, and those eyeballs will start blasting people with acid, chaos damage, and converting some of that damage to health as well. There's a 15% of the attack damage done converted to health. So, Healies is good. And then, last but not least, Acheron's Scorpion. Scorpion Sting, it's actually one that you can get very early on, and you'll just want to tag that right on to Shadow Strike, because there is a 25% chance on using your Shadow Strike to activate this one. And when you do that, you'll see the spines shoot out of the ground. It happens basically every time that we hit the Shadow Strike, because we've got Nightfall attached to it as well. Hits in an AoE, and that is going to reduce target's defensive ability, deal poison damage to them, and it is going to deal some weapon damage as well. All of that being said, each of these devotions is very, very good for dealing damage, and they work in great conjunction with your normal abilities. But that is it for this video, everybody. We'll be back next week with the ultimate version. Right now, you should see the ultimate version in the Grim Tools, because I forgot to save the elite version link before I started recording this video. So, my bad, but I'm sure you're not too upset about it. Let me know if you actually are in the comments. But that would assume that you made it this far in the video. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Peace out. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.